Morning. Today is Tuesday, I believe, December 20th. So Christmas is this week, and of course freight is very slow. I expect it to be slow probably until the second week in January. And a carrier from Tennessee reached out via email this morning and said they were moving quite a few different types of cargo, but they wanted to break into heavy haul. And this gentleman asked me for recommendations about a truck and trailer, and his requirements were, he said he didn't want to go above 90,000 pounds, right? And so I typed up a pretty long email, and then I decided, wait, it might be of interest to other people, right? Before I did a video about how to spec a trailer for heavy haul. I think I did something about the truck, but now I don't think I ever did a video where I would talk about like both a truck and a trailer. And so the first thing I do when somebody asks me a question like this, because the guy never said what his operating area is, and it's very important, but I did see in his signature it said Tennessee. And so I have a heavy haul guide with the requirements, which I downloaded free online, and basically it tells me routine permit limits, escorts, and how much weight I can get per axle, which is important because my first concern was this guy is asking me about spec recommendations and 90,000 pounds. That clear, I was thinking 8 axles, but a lot of southern states in US don't like 4-axle trailers. Like, well, they do like 4-axle trailers, they just don't like it when the axles are close together, like 54 60 inches apart, right? So they wanted to have a booster, like for example Florida or Georgia, right? Once you reach certain gross weight, you need a booster or spreader bar, right? But this guy never mentioned anything, so he's in Tennessee. So I open up the Tennessee sheet on that heavy haul guide, and it says weight, 5 axles 100,000 pounds, 6 axles 6 axles 120,000, that's gross, right? 7 axles 140, 8 axles 160, which is perfect because it's 20K per axle. And it says that's with the permit. So single 20,000 pounds, tandem 46. Not all states give you that much. Tridem 60,000, still okay. Quad, very important, 80,000 pounds, which means that at least in Tennessee, you don't need a spreader bar. You just can buy a trailer with, quad or maybe 3 plus flip and just flip it up when you don't need it. And loads exceeding these dimensions are super loads, and then escorts over 12 feet 6 inches wide, they want 1 escort, which not many loads are wider than that, and height over 15, 1 escort with height pole. But length over 85 feet, 1 escort. But that's why you don't want to deal with these, honestly, with these boosters and Jeeps, if you want to keep it simple, because as soon as you hook up a booster, right, that's like 10 to 14 feet, you'll be over that 85 feet. So you would need 1 pilot. And usually my experience as a carrier, shippers and brokers did not care too much, about this. Like, hey, you need a pilot, it's your problem, right? But that can be easy $500, $600, $700, $800 US per day, depending how much miles you're running, right? And so you want to, like, that's actually, when I was a carrier, that's the first section I would go to in this guide, I would look at the routine permit limits to make sure that I can get away with the quad, for example, and I don't need a booster, which, you know, I bought, right? So I had it. And so this would allow me to see how many axles I really need for that state. Like, for example, if this was Kansas, I know Kansas, Missouri, you don't get much weight on a quad, so you really need a booster, you know, with a heavy load. But then the second section I would always look at is escorts. When do I need an escort? You know, can I avoid using escorts? Because that takes a chunk out of my profit as carrier. And so once I learned this, that let's say what's required for Tennessee, which tells me that an 8-axle rig would work fine. And so that's what I wrote to the guy. Hey, I'll be happy to help. If you plan to haul up to 90,000 pounds around Tennessee and neighboring states, I would recommend 8 axles total, 4-axle truck, 4-axle trailer. And for the truck, I said engine. Hauling up to 90K, you'll be okay with any size engine. You don't really need a 15 liter, even 13 would be okay. As long as it has 1850 pounds of torque and at least 500 horsepower. Now, axle ratio is very important, especially with a small engine. I would suggest 410 axle ratio. Tires, I would go with regular tires, 11R 22.5. They can hold a lot of weight and they're easy to find anywhere. Because I remember when I had a Mac, my front tires were 12R 22.5, and once I had one of the tires flat, I couldn't find them anywhere. So I had to buy 2 wrong tires, and that only gave me like 12,000 on the front axle, and so I had to pay money for 2 tires. And then when I got back home, I had to pay again for 2 proper tires, 12R 22.5, you know, just to give you an idea. So a regular 11R 22.5 for the drives would be enough. Now, wheelbase, very important. I would recommend, especially since, let's say, this guy's in the States where they don't have issues with the wheelbase limitation. So I would suggest at least 265, you know, but not too long, not something crazy like 300 inches, but 265 for proper distribution of the weight. And the way you measure it, you exclude the pusher axle, right? And you just measure from the center of the steer axle to the center between the drives, right? Not to the drive axle 1, but the center point between drive axle 1 and drive axle 2. So 265 seems optimum. Some people go slightly over. Like I knew one guy, he always bought trucks with a 265 wheelbase and a pusher axle, and then I think his last truck he went to like 270, 272, but nothing too crazy above that, because then it becomes an issue with maneuverability, you know, and even like parking at a truck stop, stuff like that. Like I would stick to 265. I think it's like the gold middle, you know. Now, fifth wheel slider, very important. Must be long enough to bring the fifth wheel at least to the middle point between the pusher axle and drive axle 1. Front axle, also very important, must be at least 18K if you plan to do heavy loads. I would go with a 20K, but not everybody likes that. But 18 to 20K with tires to match. Sometimes when you go to a dealer, they don't pay attention, and if you look at your specs, the guy will give you an, let's say, 18,000 axle rating, but he'll put like 295 tires, you know, which have, you know, you get like 12,000 pounds, right, or 14,000 pounds. So always make sure the tires combined, the 2 tires will give you, let's say, 18K. Like whatever your axle rating is, tires must match that rating, otherwise it's a waste of money. Now, pusher lift axle. My first heavy haul Mac had a fixed 4-wheel axle, and I think it was like 22 or 23,000 pounds. And my last one, Canworth, had a super single steerable axle with which was 20,000 pounds. But this one worked fine, except I'm not sure why they did it like this. So my drives were 46K, but the pusher was 20, which doesn't make sense, because let's say you get 60,000 pounds, or let's say some states will give you 65, right? So this way you can actually overload. Let's say you put 65,000 on the last 3 axles of the truck, and you're gonna overload. You're gonna go over 20,000 on the pusher, right? And you can get a ticket for that because you're exceeding your factory ratings. So I would really recommend that it's the pusher axle equals the rating of the drive axle. So if you have 46K drives, which I would recommend, then the pusher axle should be 23, right? And it might be difficult to get a 23K rating on a pusher axle with super single tires. So then you have to go with a 4-wheel pusher axle. And some newer designs, they still allow it to be steerable, but as of I think last year, this Hendrickson 4-wheel steerable was not available. Many manufacturers didn't have access to it, and so, but that's very important. I would say really the pusher axle rating must match the drive axle rating. So don't do like what they give me, 20K on the pusher, 23 on the drive. Doesn't make any sense. But I would definitely recommend, let's say 23, so like 18 to 20 on the steers, 23 for the pusher, 23 for drive axle 1, 23K for drive axle 2, okay? And if you put a heavy axle on the front, you do need either like minimum dual frame inserts, like not solid double frame, because it makes the truck very heavy, but at least the inserts, and the dealer would know about this. They put those inserts above where the axles are, where the fifth wheel is, but it saves a bit of money and it saves a bit of weight. But you definitely need a stronger frame than usual if you plan to load 18 to 20K on the steer axle, which I do recommend because it does help a lot, so frame, double frame inserts or double frame if you put a heavy front axle. Transmission, this guy for some reason was asking me if a 13-speed manual would be enough, and I said I don't see why you need a manual anymore. I had an 18-speed manual in my last K-Whopper T880, and the only reason I didn't go for an automatic is because it was like 5,000 more, and repairs would be more expensive. So I got 18-speed manual Eaton, and I really hated that transmission. Many people I knew in heavy haul business were actually using Eaton automated 18-speed. And especially Tennessee, there's a lot of hills over there, right? So that's what I recommended to this guy. I said, don't just, your drivers will hate you if you put a manual for a heavy haul operation. Just use any heavy duty automated transmission, because nowadays they're very good, they're very reliable. Just make sure that the torque rating matches the torque of the engine, right? And did I mention this? Yeah, 1850 torque would be a minimum for the engine. 2050 torque would be better, but you can get that only with a big 15-liter engine, and of course that adds lots of weight. Like when I had the Kenworth with a double frame, heavy front axle, big engine, and the difference between that one and my smaller Mack I had before was 3,000 pounds, I think, or 4,000 pounds. Yeah, like the Mack with 4 axles but very short wheelbase, 244, I think it was 23,000 pounds, whereas my Kenworth weighed at 27,000 pounds, and you want to keep this as light as possible, but strong enough for loads, but If this guy was like, again, this recommendation is for the guy who wants to do 90K in payload. I didn't have any issues with the Mac. I did one load. It was a big John Deere excavator. It was like about 92,000 pounds. And the only problem I had was because the truck wheelbase was so short, 244, and that's why I recommend 265. I wasn't able to turn, with my fixed four-wheel pusher axle down. I wasn't able to turn. The truck just refused to turn. Unless I lift the pusher axle, the front tires were just sliding on the pavement. That's why you need a longer wheelbase, because once you have like at least 265, you don't have to lift the pusher axle, even if it's fixed, to make turns, right? And there was one problem with that load, that that truck didn't have a double frame, and the front axle was only 14,000 pounds. And so when I lifted the pusher on turns, the whole truck was like creaking, like it was about to break. It was like really complaining, because imagine with 92,000 pounds, I would have probably like 20, 22, 23,000 on the front, especially with such a short wheelbase, So I really don't like, lifting the pusher axle with a heavy load, because you can damage the truck, you can damage the suspension, and it was just a bit scary, with that Mac, again, because of the very light steer axle, 14K only, very short wheelbase, 244, which I would never do again, and a regular frame, not double frame, and no inserts anywhere. So that truck was a bit weak because of this, but for 90,000, yeah, once you have 18 to 20K front axle, 23 pusher, right, 46 drives, heavy frame, you should be okay. So automated transmission, an engine at least 1850 torque, better yet 250, and axle ratio at least 410. That's for the truck. Now the trailer. The trailer, of course, I suggest a hydraulic RGN. Mechanicals are a pain in the butt to hook up and disconnect, and you don't actually gain anything, and your driver can be in trouble if you come up to a railroad crossing, unless you have some special suspension mods where you can lift your suspension on the truck. You'll be stuck at that railroad crossing. Quite a few times when I had my 55 ton and 60 ton, my butt was saved because I see a huge hill like this over the railroad crossing, and the front under the ramps on the trailer was like this high, so I know I would catch the ground and I can get stuck on the rails. So I would quickly stop, put on my four-way flashers, jump out, because I had a PTO. Oh, that's one thing I forgot. Yeah, PTO, definitely. You don't want to mess with those Honda engines. I would order the truck with a PTO for sure, hydraulic power takeoff, which provides power to the trailer. So all I had to do was stop, put on my four-way flashers, push in the clutch, click the button on the dash to start the PTO, and then run to the trailer, raise it. Let's say to Fontaine comes with 5 positions. All you need to do is just move one lever. I would just raise it to position 5. Takes 15 seconds. Run back to the truck, kill the PTO, move over that hill, stop again, go lower the trailer to the proper transport position, keep going. You cannot do that with a manual mechanical trailer. And watching guys deal with them, unhooking, rehooking, it takes them like 3 times longer than what it takes me with a hydraulic. So, but some people still have, bad thoughts about hydraulics. Oh, what if it, breaks or, starts, I'm losing hydraulic fluid. But if you look around, all construction machinery since probably the end of World War II, uses hydraulics, right? So hydraulics now is super reliable. I think I had a leak only once on my hydraulics, and only because there was a, plastic tie, and some of those ties have very sharp corners, and it was cutting into a hose, and the plastic tie under the cab, it was holding the hose, and that's where it was leaking. But other than that, like the connections, I never had any issues, And so hydraulics nowadays, it's not the hydraulics they used in the 60s and 70s, So hydraulic is the way to go. Again, look at the excavators, dozers, wheel loaders, everything uses hydraulics in the construction world. So there's no reason not to use hydraulics with heavy haul trailers. Okay, so rating capacity. Now for 90,000 pounds, all you need technically is a 50-ton trailer, which is 100,000, right? The issue is that some of these, they will not allow you a long enough neck, and they will not give you an option to hook up a flip axle. And those are only two reasons why, I had to go with a 55-ton, because, for example, Fontaine 55-ton, they had option to add a 23-inch flip box or neck extension in the front, and it was prepped for a flip axle, right? Whereas with 50-ton, usually you don't get that. And so that's what I wrote to this guy. I said, if you want to do 90,000 pounds, either 50 or 55-ton rating capacity would work, but you need to make sure that the gooseneck swing radius is at least 110 inches. Because what happens is some manufacturers will just give you a regular, let's say, 90 inches or 101 inches, and that's not enough. For anything over like 80,000 pounds on the deck, you really need at least 110, 115, 120. So that's why when I had Fontaine 55-ton, the swing radius was 101, and I purchased a 23-inch neck extension, so I was 124, which was perfect. I never had a ticket because I was slightly longer than legal, but I always kept that flip box down, and so I had 124. It worked very well. Otherwise, if you have a very short neck, like standard 90 or 100 inches, your truck will be overloaded because your truck is too close to the trailer, and the typical deck is not long enough to move the load all the way to the back, Like there's only so much space where you can position, let's say, an excavator, right? And so you want to keep your truck away from the load. So you need at least 110 on the neck. Deck can be either level or flat or drop side rail. I had both, and I really missed the drop side rail when I had my last trailer. But the drop side rail, to be fair, it works great with big machines, but it doesn't work well with smaller machines, like smaller dozers, anything that has tracks or wheels close together, because the drop side rail has a raised center, right? And so let's say if you're looking for a backhaul, and everything, all you see is like a small dozer, you'll scratch the heck out of your trailer because the tracks will be scratching the raised center, right? So depends what you want to haul, but if all you do is big machines, I would say drop side rail is awesome, because my other recommendation is whether you get a level deck or drop side rail, do not go above 18 inches loaded deck height. Okay, because drop side rail on the sides, my Fontaine was like 14.5, or realistically in real life it was more like 15, 16 inches. But my last trailer was, and that was perfect, but my last trailer, 60-ton, was 22 inches, or pretty much 2 feet. And that was too much, because you don't want to be overall, especially in Northeast US, you don't want to be over 14 feet. Okay, maybe 14.2, 14.3 is okay, and so that means that if your trailer is 2 feet tall, you can only take a 12 foot tall machine. Anything over that becomes problematic because then you need all these escorts with height poles, you know, extra expense. And so 18 inches, that gives you extra what, 6 inches, right, compared to a 2-foot tall trailer, 24. So that's, I would say that would be maximum you want to have, 18 inches loaded deck height. And again, when you look at the loaded deck height, what you have to realize is that that's the number with the full load on the trailer. And so so let's say they tell you your trailer is 20 inches loaded deck height and it's a 55-ton trailer. What that means is that for you to have 20 inches, you need to load 110,000 pounds on the deck. So anything less than that, and you will not see 20 inches, you will see like 22, 23, or 24, right? Because the trailer is built like this for a heavy load. And if you don't have enough weight, it will not go down far enough, right? And so you have to take these loaded deck heights ratings with a grain of salt. So the lower, the better. And also, of course, if you have a market for super tall equipment, you can get another deck. Let's say if you go with a modular trailer where you can change the deck, it will be helpful to have a beam deck. Then you can haul super tall machinery like 13.6 tall, or you can get a mini deck. Now mini deck is really cool because it's like this tall, right? And so the loaded deck height would be, I don't know, 10, 12 inches, but it's all solid metal because it's not stiff enough. And so that would be great if you, let's say you're moving like a big generator, you know, or a huge tractor, which are tall but not too heavy, because these mini decks, they're not very strong, right? So from what I've seen, it's like typical 45, 50 ton. Otherwise they become too heavy and they need to create like a very big arch to stay strong. But yeah, mini deck also is a cool trailer. And that's one recommendation I gave to the guy. I said, if you can afford it, go with a modular trailer. So this way you can change decks. And ideally you want to buy your trailer with a deck insert like together, right? So deck length, I suggested 27 feet is good, 28 is better. And then when you buy a trailer, you buy, let's say, a 5-foot deck insert. And this way, if somebody hires you to haul like a rough terrain crane, like a 3 or 4 axle crane, and 28 would not be enough sometimes. So you just, you know, you call your yard guy and you just unscrew those couple of bolts in the back and you put in the deck insert, and now you have 28 plus 5, which is more than enough for a crane, you know. So a deck insert can be very useful with an RGN trailer. Okay, I missed quite a few loads when I was a carrier because my 55 ton and 60 ton, they only had 26 feet in the well, and I remember a couple of times I missed a load because the guy specifically wanted at least 27 feet and I couldn't make it work, right? And so if I was buying a trailer now, I would definitely buy 28 feet in the well and a deck insert at the same time. So I'm ready to go. If somebody offers me a long load, I'm there, okay? Now axles, again, because I looked up Tennessee and they were okay to give you 80,000 pounds on a quad, so you don't need a booster. I would go with a 4-axle trailer, just a regular quad, but I would make the last axle a flip and make it hydraulic. It's not super perfect because you cannot separate it, but it makes it easier for drivers to flip it, right? Just hook up your hydraulic line from the truck and you just flip a switch, boom. All I have to do is just put in a couple of pins and off you go into the distance. Speaking about the spacing, I had trailers with 54-inch and 60-inch spacing, and there might be some minor differences in the south. Like for example, Alabama would give you more weight with a permit if you have 60-inch spacing, but also 54 would work fine, because with 60-inch spacing, what happens is that you really killing your tires. I noticed quite right away that when I had the 60-ton with a 60-inch spacing, my front axle, the tires were wearing out faster than when I had 54-inch spacing, because you know the front axle takes basically a brunt of the weight, and the next axle is 60 inches further away, so when they're closer it's easier on the trailer, right? So I would go with 54-inch spacing, you know. And of course you want all aluminum wheels to reduce the weight. And tires, quite often I see a 50-ton or even a 55-ton, and they give you 255-millimeter tires, which is not good at all, because many states would go by how wide your tires are when they give you the weight per axle. And so I would definitely say 275 millimeter tires, you know, 275 width, the only way to go, whether you have a 50-ton or 55-ton trailer. And I think that's it. That's all my recommendations for the trailer. So the deck, tires, axle spacings, modular design, deck length, deck height, and the truck. And I think that's it. So that was quite a lengthy email I wrote to the guy, because I was happy to share some knowledge, and I just decided, hey, might as well do a video about this, because I know some truckers are watching this, and maybe some brokers are watching this, because this would, I think for brokers or agents, this would be a good primer, you know, on what kind of a trucking equipment you need when you, let's say you're looking for a carrier to move a specific load. And also for carriers, just like this guy, that look to break into heavy haul, this would give you some good ideas on the specs. And I know, at least in Ontario, where I was based before I came to Alberta, it was very difficult nowadays to get a Cummins big engine, like 15-liter. You had to wait like a year or 2 years, but unless you're like a big carrier, you know, like a big shot, and dealers, you know, extend their, you know, hospitality towards your company, but you might find out that all you can get is a 13-liter engine. But again, because if you don't want to go above 90K on the deck, pretty much that's all you need. As long as you go with 1850 torque and automated transmission and strong axles and strong frame and heavy front. So I hope that helped somebody. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you on the next one.